we can move swiftly on from the title and make some very brief comments on the context of special educational needs and inclusive education in the English context. Firstly, it's a truism to say that negative experiences are the norm for children, young people, and families if they happen to have a special education needs and disability label. At the same time, I do think it important to note that there is good quality educational provision available in different parts of the country across sectors and phases. However, again, a truism, that's being provided in the face of or in spite of policy rather than because of it. And that actually, we've got to be honest and say that many of the systemic problems in the system in England can be identified as far back as 1999 and can not only be associated with where we are today or in the most recent decade. Next, please. There's an obvious blame game, and I won't run through this list in detail. You'll all be familiar with the people that get blamed for so-called broken SEND system in England. However, I was shocked to see in the recently published ISOS Partnership Local Government Authority report on this that they took a very neutral stance, didn't acknowledge that blame could actually be attributed to three key players, I think, for systemic failure. The first is central government. The second, as I will argue, is actually National Inspectorate. And the third, it has to be said, is local authority leadership in many respects. We go back to 2010 very briefly. From the points noted here, it was very evident in 2010 when a coalition government came into power that SEN policy was going to be marginal to majority focused policy. So it was put very much in a wing. And the 2010 Ofsted report should not be forgotten. It was really influential. It influenced the government at the time. Next slide, please. And put forward a rather bizarre argument about SEN being too broadly used as a categorization. And there's some truth in that. What it actually led to in reality was local authorities, schools, and government determining that we could write off 500,000 children and young people with special educational needs almost at a stroke. And that fed into policy that followed. Next slide, please. So in effect, local areas deregistered significant numbers of children. Some notion that a so-called universal teaching would resolve all problems immediately for a significant number of children and young people became the leitmotif for policy. And this fed directly into policy and legislation. Next slide, please. And when we had a framework for improvement introduced, and you can see it in summary form here through legislation, guidance, inspection regimes, and then more recently, repair jobs in terms of the special education needs review and the new improvement plan, what we actually have put in place has not led in any way, shape, or form to an improved system. So actually policy that the last government introduced was naive in terms of the way that it significantly ignored completely things like curriculum design and expectations of children and young people. Failure was built into current SEN policy by exclusion. So too many children and young people were not thought of because the government's sole focus was on a small group of children and young people can have their needs better met through education, healthcare, planning, etc. And policy completely abjectly failed to anticipate the role that local authorities will be able to play in the future with regard to their statutory duties. We now are in a position, bridging last government to where we are with this government, and by the way, we have been faced with pretty much silence from the minister responsible for special education needs and disability since the new government came into power. There's a lot going on underneath the radar, as it were, but the Department for Education in particular has been characterised by poor communication, inadequate coherence of its initiatives, bizarre rapid evaluation claims, poor scrutiny of what it's doing, and a complete lack of political leadership. So whether that's the last government or where we are now, ministerial leadership has either been transient or focused on missing in action. It's also the case, and it's important to note, that the Department for Education has become deeply mistrusted by the Treasury because of the way it has handled SEND financing over a 15, 20-year period. Next slide. We need to rebuild trust, make sure there's appropriate political leadership, have genuine stakeholder engagement in the system that isn't about usual suspects, have proper, more independent support and challenge available, and we must grapple with the important conceptual challenges in the system and re-examine key roles in the system. For example, educational psychologists, therapists, and revisit what the basics are to make a system work better very, very soon and not 10 years down the line. Last slide. The SEND Policy Research Group that I'm a member of has put together its own agenda for trying to address some of these challenges, and you can look that up using the reference I've given you. Thanks.